My daughter looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're not needed here." That was the moment I slid the spare keys back into my pocket and decided she would never use them again. For years I gave her everything, my savings, my health, my home, and in return, she gave me silence, coldness, and finally, those 4 words that cut deeper than any knife. The kind of words that erase decades of sacrifice in a single breath. But what she didn't know is that the house she thought she owned, the life she thought she controlled, was still tied to my name. She thought she had pushed me out. In truth, she had just pushed me into action. Because when your own child tells you you're no longer needed, you learn the sharpest form of love is self-respect. And what I did next would change her life forever. Would you have walked away or taken back what was yours? Subscribe, share your thoughts below, and listen closely, because this story is real. I grew up in Minnesota, where winters are long and quiet, and people learn to survive on grit, prayer, and small acts of endurance. That same grit shaped my life when I became a mother. I wasn't handed ease or luxury. I wasn't given partners who stayed or neighbors who always helped. I learned to survive by giving, and by giving more when it hurt. When my husband left, my daughter was barely 2. He walked out on a snow-heavy night in February, leaving nothing behind but a torn jacket and the faint smell of whiskey in the hallway. I remember standing in the doorway, holding her in my arms, while the cold wind blew against my face. She was crying. I was silent. And in that silence, I promised myself she would never know the weight of abandonment, even if I had to carry it alone. I worked 2 jobs. By day, I stood on my feet at the diner, pouring endless cups of coffee for truckers and old men who tipped me with coins. By night, I scrubbed offices until my fingers cracked and bled from the chemicals. Some nights, I would return home so tired that I would collapse onto the couch still wearing my uniform, smelling of bleach and burnt bacon grease. But even in exhaustion, I would tiptoe into her room, brush her hair off her forehead, and whisper, "You'll never be alone." She didn't hear me, but I said it anyway, because a mother's promises are stitched into the air even when no one answers back. Minnesota winters are cruel, the kind of cold that makes your bones ache, the kind of snow that buries cars until they vanish like forgotten memories. There were mornings when the heat bill was late, and I had to wrap her in 3 blankets, praying the furnace would hold just a little longer. She would giggle, pretending it was a game, pretending we were camping inside our own living room. She never knew that while she laughed, I was biting my lip to stop the tears. I gave her the best of everything I could afford, even if it meant I went without. Her shoes were always new when school started, even if mine had holes in the soles. Her backpack was sturdy, her lunches full. She never knew that I ate oatmeal 3 nights in a row, so she could have fresh fruit in hers. Sacrifice becomes routine when you are a mother. It becomes your second heartbeat. When she turned 10, she asked why we didn't have family dinners like other people. I smiled, setting down a plate of macaroni and cheese, and told her, "This is our family dinner." She didn't see the ache in my chest when she asked again, "Where's Dad?" I told her he loved her, but he couldn't stay. She nodded, but the question didn't leave her eyes. I kept going. I stitched clothes to save money. I sold pies at church events to cover school trips. When her classmates carried new cell phones, I worked double shifts to get her one too. I didn't want her to feel less than anyone else. And when she walked across the stage at her high school graduation, I cried so hard I couldn't even clap properly. Because in that moment, every blister, every cold night, every sacrifice felt worth it. College was another mountain. Tuition bills came like storms, threatening to drown me. But I picked up extra shifts, cleaned more floors, and never let her see me falter. She thought scholarships were covering most of it. The truth was, I was covering it with my knees on the floor and my back bent over toilets. But that didn't matter to me. What mattered was seeing her step onto a campus with pride in her eyes, walking toward a future that I could only dream of. When she married, I paid for the dress. I sold the last piece of jewelry my mother had given me, a gold bracelet that had survived decades of family history. I told myself it was just an object, but my hand shook as I let it go. At her wedding, people complimented how beautiful she looked, how lavish the reception was. No one knew that I had drained half my savings to make it happen. I didn't care. Her happiness was my reward. The house, the small 2-story home with peeling paint and a crooked porch, was my greatest offering. I bought it with 30 years of labor, one paycheck at a time. Every crack in the wall held a memory. Every window carried the weight of prayers whispered through sleepless nights. When she moved back after her wedding fell apart, I placed the keys in her hand. They were cold, heavy, almost trembling. I smiled and said, "This is still your home." She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. Looking back now, I realized that moment was a passing of power. I thought I was giving her shelter, giving her stability, but in truth, I was giving her control. And control can turn love into entitlement faster than frost spreads across a Minnesota window. She began to speak differently, more curt, more distant. She criticized the meals I cooked, saying they were too old-fashioned. She laughed when I told stories of working double shifts, as if sacrifice was some kind of outdated joke. I brushed it off, telling myself it was stress, that life had hardened her. But the distance grew. The more I gave, the less she seemed to see me. It was as if my sacrifices became invisible the moment they were completed. She saw the results, the house, the clothes, the education, but she didn't see me. One evening, I was folding laundry when she came home late. She barely looked at me. I asked softly, "Did you eat?" She sighed, rolling her eyes, and muttered, "I'm not a child, Mom." It stung, not because of the words, but because of the tone. Cold, dismissive, a tone that stripped away all the years of warmth we once shared. Still, I held my silence. Still, I continued giving. Because mothers give, even when their children forget how to receive. But the silence was starting to suffocate me. Nights grew longer, the house colder, even with the heat on. I found myself wandering through rooms, touching the walls, as if they could remind me of the joy that used to live here. The house was full, yet I felt alone. And then, one day, she looked me in the eye and spoke the words that would change everything. I thought I had given her everything, but what she gave me next was a sentence that erased it all. It was a gray afternoon, the kind of Minnesota day where the sky hangs low and even the air feels heavy. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter, when she came in. Her footsteps were sharp, quick, as if she had rehearsed them. She didn't look at me. She looked at the floor, then at her phone, then finally at me. And that's when she said it. "You're not needed here." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed like stone, heavy and final. For a moment I couldn't move. The rag in my hand grew damp as water dripped through my fingers, but I didn't notice. My ears rang, my chest tightened. After decades of sacrifice, of raising her alone, of fighting for her future, those 4 words were the reward. I searched her face for softness, for hesitation, for any flicker of regret. There was none. Her lips pressed tight, her shoulders squared, her eyes hard. She meant it. I whispered, barely audible, "Not needed?" She sighed, loud, exasperated, as if my shock was the inconvenience, not her cruelty. "Mom, I'm an adult now. I don't need you hovering. I don't need your advice. And honestly, I don't need you in this house. You make it feel small. Stuck. Her words cut deeper than any blade. Each sentence chipped away at the years I had built on my back. This house. The house where she took her first steps. Where she scribbled on the walls with crayons I couldn't afford to replace. Where she cried into my lap after her first heartbreak. Now it was stuck. Now it was small. And so was I. I didn't answer. The silence said everything. She shook her head, muttering under her breath, "You don't get it. Times are different. You're old, out of touch. I want a life that's mine, not tied to your stories of struggle. My stories of struggle." She spat them out like they were shameful, like they weren't the reason she stood where she stood. The kettle on the stove whistled then, piercing through the thick tension. I reached over, turned it off, and set it aside. Small movements, small survival gestures. Inside, though, my heart was cracking. I wanted to scream, to remind her of every night I worked while she slept, every bill I paid so she could dream, every tear I swallowed so she could smile. I wanted to shout until the walls shook with the truth. But I didn't. Instead, I stared at her, my daughter, my only child, and I realized something. She wasn't just dismissing me, she was erasing me. I steadied myself, my voice cold and even. "This house has always been my home. Never forget who gave you the keys." Her eyes flickered, but only for a moment. Then she rolled them, dismissive. "Fine, but don't expect me to thank you for clinging to the past. I don't need it. I don't need you." The final blow, delivered without tremor, without care. I nodded slowly. My fingers brushed the keys in my apron pocket, the same keys I had placed in her hands months before. Heavy, metallic, a symbol of trust. Without another word, I slipped them out of sight, curling my fist around them until the edges pressed into my skin. She didn't notice. She was already back on her phone, scrolling, walking out of the kitchen as if nothing had happened. The silence that followed was louder than her words. I sank into the chair, staring at the wooden floorboards I had scrubbed for years. Each groove, each scuff, carried a piece of our history. And now those same boards felt foreign, like I was the guest in my own home. I thought of the nights I rocked her to sleep, whispering promises. I thought of the mornings I packed lunches, tucking in small notes that said, "I'm proud of you." I thought of the day I worked a double shift just to buy her the dress she wanted for prom, all erased by 4 words. "You're not needed here." The words replayed in my mind, over and over, until they no longer sounded like hers, but like a cold truth whispered by the house itself. I pressed the keys tighter in my palm. They dug into my flesh, sharp and unforgiving. And in that pain, I found clarity. I wasn't unneeded. I was unwanted. And there's a difference. Unneeded means the world goes on without you. Unwanted means someone is blind to your worth, and blindness can be corrected. That night, I sat in my room with the lights off. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I held the keys in my hand and stared at them for hours. These keys had unlocked doors for her all her life. Doors to shelter, to safety, to stability. And now they would unlock something else, something she would never see coming. Because betrayal has a way of sharpening resolve. Because dignity doesn't disappear. It waits in silence until you claim it back. And I knew then that what she had taken from me wasn't just respect. She had taken my place in my own home, and I was going to take it back. After her words, silence became my companion. I didn't argue with her anymore. I didn't beg for respect. I moved like a shadow in my own home, listening, watching, collecting. Outwardly, I seemed small, defeated. Inwardly, I was sharper than ever. The first thing I did was pull out the old metal box I kept at the back of my closet. Inside, beneath yellowed letters and faded photographs, were the papers she had forgotten, or perhaps never cared to ask about. The deed to the house. My name written in thick black ink. No cosigner, no amendments, no daughter, just me. I ran my fingers over the raised seal, feeling the weight of every shift I had worked to earn it. The house wasn't hers. It never had been. I had only lent her shelter, never ownership. That was my first piece of strength. The second came when I began to notice how she treated the place. She hosted parties that spilled out onto the porch, bottles rattling in trash bins, music pounding through walls that once knew only lullabies. Strangers' shoes dirtied the carpets I had scrubbed until my knees ached. She laughed with friends in the kitchen, the same room where I had once prayed over boiling pots of soup to stretch a week's groceries. She didn't see me standing in the doorway. She didn't hear me when I whispered into the noise. Respect builds a home. Carelessness destroys it. Still, I stayed quiet, because silence was my shield now. One morning, I went downtown to a lawyer's office. The building smelled of paper and polished wood, the air humming with low voices and shuffling feet. I clutched my folder of documents as if it were armor. The lawyer, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, adjusted his glasses as he skimmed the deed. "Ma'am," he said softly, "this house is yours. No transfer of title, no shared ownership. If she's living here, it's because you allow it, not because she owns it." I nodded, my throat tight. "And if I stop allowing it?" He looked at me carefully. "Then the law is on your side. You can change the locks. You can remove her legally. She may resist, but the power rests with you." I sat back, breathing slowly. Power. A word I hadn't tasted in years. "Do you want to proceed?" he asked. I didn't answer immediately. I stared at the keys in my hand, the same ones that had dug into my palm the night she said I wasn't needed. My silence stretched long enough that he didn't press me. Finally, I whispered, "Not yet, but soon." Because revenge is not rushed. Revenge is planted, watered, and allowed to grow until its roots are unshakable. At home, I started preparing quietly. I sorted through mail, bills, bank statements. I noticed her debts mounting, credit cards maxed, utilities unpaid. She was living recklessly, assuming safety where none existed. Each evening, while she scrolled her phone or watched TV, I sat at the table writing lists. What was mine? What was hers? What I would take back. I found myself sharpening old scissors one night, the sound of metal against stone echoing in the quiet. I wasn't sewing. I wasn't crafting. I was reminding myself that dull things can be made sharp again. Even me. I remembered how she once told me, "You don't understand the world now, Mom. Everything's different." But she was wrong. I understood the world better than she did. The world hadn't changed. It had just revealed itself. The selfish still take, the blind still waste, and the silent, when pushed too far, still rise. I began keeping small secrets, extra copies of documents hidden in new places, spare keys she didn't know existed, a private account where I started moving what little savings remained, dollar by dollar, away from her reach. One evening, she asked offhandedly, "Mom, you didn't touch the savings account, right? I need to borrow some for rent next month." I looked up from my knitting, calm, expressionless. "No," I said evenly, "I haven't touched it." The truth sat quietly between us. She was the one draining it, not me. She nodded, distracted, and walked away. She never noticed the faint smile that tugged at my lips, because every word she spoke without looking at me made her weaker in my eyes. I started watching her patterns. She would leave late at night, return with makeup smudged and laughter still clinging to her hair. She spent money she didn't have, spoke words she couldn't back, lived a life built on illusions. And all the while, I built my plan. There's a power in being underestimated. She thought I was old, tired, useless. She thought not needed meant I would fade into the background. What she didn't realize was that invisibility is the perfect cloak for preparation. One night while she slept, I walked through the house with a notebook. I touched every wall, every window, every door. I listed repairs, costs, details only I would know. This was my house. And soon, everyone, including her, would be reminded of that fact. The moonlight spilled across the floor, and I whispered into the shadows, "You may live here now, but you do not own this, and you do not own me." Each day after that, I felt stronger. I carried the silence like a weapon, every unspoken word sharpening the blade. I remembered a phrase my own mother once told me: "Dignity doesn't leave, it waits." And I knew my dignity had been waiting for this very moment. I didn't announce my plans. I didn't confront her with threats. I simply prepared, slowly, quietly, deliberately. Because revenge is not a storm, it is a season, and mine was just beginning. The morning I decided to act, the air was sharp with frost. Minnesota winters have a way of reminding you what survival feels like. Each breath burns, each step crunches with finality. That was the rhythm in my chest that day. Finality. I waited until she left for work. Her perfume still hung faintly in the hallway, mixed with the sour smell of last night's wine. When the door shut behind her, I stood in the quiet for a long moment, listening. No footsteps upstairs, no music, just silence. That silence was mine. I opened the drawer and pulled out the new set of locks I had bought with cash, tucked in a plain brown bag. My hands were steady as I unscrewed the old bolts, the ones I had once polished with pride when I gave her her first set of keys. Each screw that fell onto the floor was like a chain breaking. Click, click, freedom. By noon, the locks were replaced. The metal glinted sharp and new, unmarked by her hands. I slid the keys into my pocket, curling my fingers tight around them. Warm now, not cold. Alive. The first step was done. Next, I went to the bank. The clerk knew me well, years of depositing small checks, carefully folded. I asked to close the joint account, the one she had been quietly bleeding dry. The clerk looked at me with raised eyebrows. "Are you sure?" I nodded once. Completely. When the last dollar moved into my private account, I exhaled slowly, like air leaving a wound. For the first time in months, I didn't feel drained. I felt whole. That night, when she came home, she tried the door. I was standing in the living room, lights dim, listening. The sound of her key scratching against the new lock sent a thrill through me. She jiggled it harder. Metal against metal. Useless. Then her voice sharp and rising. "Mom, the lock's broken. Open the door." I didn't move. She banged harder. "Do you hear me? Open it." I stood behind the curtain, watching her silhouette through the frosted glass. Her breath fogged the air, frantic, impatient. For once she was outside, and I was in. Finally, I opened the door slowly. The chain latch still held, leaving only a crack. Her face was red with cold and anger. "What did you do?" she demanded. I spoke calmly, evenly. "I changed the locks." Her mouth fell open. Shock, disbelief, and a flicker of fear. "You can't just— This is my house," I cut in, my voice steady as stone. "I can." And I did. Her eyes darted, searching for weakness. "You've lost it, Mom. You're crazy." I didn't argue. I closed the door softly in her face. The latch clicked, final and unyielding. Her fists pounded once, twice, then silence. She slept elsewhere that night. I didn't ask where. The next day I visited the courthouse. The clerk slid papers across the counter, explaining the process. Eviction notices, legal filings, words heavy with consequence. I signed my name with steady strokes. Every letter was a declaration. I am not erased. Weeks passed in quiet execution. Documents were filed, accounts secured, repairs scheduled in my name. All the while she moved through the house like a restless ghost, demanding explanations, shouting accusations. One night she cornered me in the kitchen. Her voice cracked with fury. "You can't do this to me. This is my home too." I looked up from my teacup, steam curling into the air. "No," I said softly. "It never was." She slammed her hand on the table, rattling the porcelain. "After everything I've done," I leaned forward, cutting her words short. "Everything you've done? Or everything I've given?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silence pressed heavy. She stormed out, her footsteps shaking the floor. I didn't flinch. Every move I made was deliberate, measured. I wasn't driven by rage anymore. I was driven by clarity. Revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about restoration, about placing things back where they belonged. One evening, she returned late, dragging bags through the door. She stopped abruptly, staring at the empty corner where the old family chest used to be. "Where's the trunk?" she asked, her voice tight. "In storage," I replied. "My name's on it, not yours." Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She was starting to understand. I watched her unravel slowly. The parties stopped. The friends faded. The laughter disappeared. She was alone now, facing a truth she couldn't manipulate. The house, the money, the stability, it was never hers. The first official notice came in the mail. Thick envelope, bold letters. She opened it in the living room, her hands trembling. I sat quietly, knitting by the window. Her voice cracked as she read. "Eviction? You filed for eviction?" I didn't look up. "Yes." Her chair scraped back violently. "You can't! I'm your daughter." I set down my knitting needles, meeting her eyes at last. "And I was your mother. The difference is I never forgot what that meant." Her face crumbled then, anger, fear, disbelief swirling all at once. She stormed upstairs, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. But the papers didn't care about slammed doors. The law didn't care about tantrums. And for once, neither did I. Day by day, step by step, I took my life back. Quietly, legally, completely. And as I watched her panic grow, I realized something. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing the house, the comfort, the illusion of control. She had told me I wasn't needed. Now she was learning what that really meant. Because without me, without my name, without my sacrifice, she had nothing. And that truth was only beginning to break her. The day of the confrontation began like any other, but I felt the shift in the air. The sky was clear, the kind of brittle blue you only see in Minnesota winters. Sharp, exposed, honest. That was the kind of day it was meant to be. My sister had invited us all for Sunday dinner, a tradition we rarely kept anymore, but this time my daughter insisted we attend. I knew why. She wanted to parade her version of the story. She wanted an audience for her narrative of control. But I had my own story to tell. The dining room was warm, crowded with family chatter, the smell of roast beef and potatoes heavy in the air. Coats piled by the door. Laughter rose from cousins in the corner. My daughter walked in tall, her chin high, acting as if the eviction notice was just a smudge on her shoe. I stayed quiet, seating myself at the long oak table. I listened as she charmed relatives, speaking loudly so her words carried. "She's losing it," she said with a sigh, gesturing toward me. "Mom thinks she still owns the world. She changed the locks, can you believe it? At her age? It's sad, really." Murmurs rippled across the table. Some glanced at me, their eyes soft with pity. Others looked away, uncomfortable. She smiled, satisfied with her performance. I let her speak. I let her paint her picture, because sometimes you let someone build their stage just to set fire to it. Finally, my sister turned to me, her brow furrowed. Is this true? Did you really change the locks? All eyes shifted to me. The room hushed. I placed my fork down slowly, deliberately. My hands didn't tremble. My voice was steady, measured. Yes, I said. I changed the locks, because this house, I paused, letting the silence breathe, is mine. Gasps. Chairs creaked. The room leaned in. My daughter laughed, sharp and brittle. Yours? Mom, stop embarrassing yourself. Everyone knows you couldn't have done this without me. I turned to her, my eyes cold but clear. Without you? Let me remind you of something. When you were 2 years old, your father walked out. When you were sick, I worked through the night just to buy your medicine. When you wanted college, I scrubbed floors so you could walk into classrooms I never dreamed of. Every brick of that house, every nail in its walls, was bought with my hands, my back, my silence. Not yours. The room was silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her interrupt. And when you came back after your marriage fell apart, I gave you shelter. I gave you keys. I gave you the safety I never had. And how did you repay me? My voice rose, sharp now, cutting through the air. By telling me I wasn't needed. By erasing decades of sacrifice in 4 words. The room froze. No one moved. Even the children stopped fidgeting, sensing the storm. I pulled a folder from my bag, sliding papers across the table. Deeds, bank statements, legal notices. Here is the truth. My name, my ownership, my right. She never had it. She only borrowed it. And now she has lost it. Whispers erupted. Eyes widened. Heads turned toward her. Her face flushed crimson. She stammered, her hands shaking as she shoved the papers back. This doesn't mean anything. She's twisting it. But the evidence lay heavy and undeniable. My cousin spoke softly, almost to herself. It's all in her name. She never transferred it. The whispers grew into a storm. Disbelief, judgment, shame swirling in the room like smoke. My daughter stood abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. You don't understand, she shouted. She's controlling. She's selfish. She wants to ruin my life. I rose slowly, my voice steady, commanding. Selfish? Control? Let me tell you what selfish is. Selfish is bleeding someone dry and then calling them useless. Selfish is living in a house built by sacrifice and spitting on the hands that built it. Selfish is forgetting that the person who gave you everything still deserves respect. Her lips trembled, words failing her. I leaned forward, my voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear. I may be old, I may be tired, but I am not erased. I am not unneeded. I am a mother who gave and a woman who takes back what is hers. The room erupted, not with applause, not with laughter, but with silence so loud it crushed her. Relatives looked away from her, disappointment etched on their faces. Neighbors whispered behind hands. She was exposed. Her mask cracked. Tears welled, but they didn't soften her. They only made her smaller. For the first time, she looked around and found no allies. No one defended her. No one comforted her. The audience she wanted had turned against her. She fled the room, her heels clicking desperately against the hardwood, the front door slamming so hard the windows rattled. I remained standing, my chest rising steady, my hands resting on the table. The papers lay before everyone like a verdict carved in stone. And in that moment, I wasn't just a mother betrayed. I was justice delivered. She thought she had shamed me. Instead, she walked out carrying the weight of her own disgrace. and I was left with silence finally on my side. When the door slammed behind her that night, the house sighed with relief. The echoes faded, leaving only quiet. For the first time in years, that silence wasn't heavy. It was clean. It was mine. I walked slowly through each room, my hand trailing across walls I had once scrubbed raw, windows I had polished until sunlight sparkled through. They no longer felt foreign. They no longer whispered betrayal. They felt like home again. The kitchen smelled of roast and coffee, simple scents that belonged to me. I brewed myself a cup, the steam rising in soft curls, and sat at the table where she had once shouted. The wood felt solid beneath my palm, not shaking, not uncertain. I sipped slowly, tasting freedom in the bitter warmth. The eviction went through without protest. Perhaps she knew fighting would only humiliate her further. Perhaps she had no strength left. She left quietly, taking her bags and her silence. No goodbye, no apology, just absence. And strangely, that absence was a gift. In the weeks that followed, I settled back into rhythms that felt like stitches mending torn fabric. I rose early, opened the curtains to let winter light spill across the living room. I shoveled the driveway myself, the scrape of metal against ice steady and grounding. I tended the garden when spring broke through the snow, planting small rows of tomatoes and marigolds. Every act felt like a reclamation, a seed in the soil, a door shutting firm, a key turned by my own hand. Neighbors stopped by, some curious, some kind. One evening, Mrs. Keller from next door knocked with a basket of warm bread. She placed her hand on mine, her eyes soft. "You did what many of us only dream of doing," she whispered. "You stood up for yourself." Her words stayed with me. Because it wasn't just about standing up. It was about finally being seen. Inside, I began to repair things. Not just the walls or the leaking faucet, though I did those too. I repaired my spirit. I pulled old quilts from the attic, running my hands over stitches I had sewn decades ago. Threads frayed, colors faded, but still holding, like me. I patched them slowly, needle and thread weaving strength back into worn places. Each patch felt symbolic, proof that broken doesn't mean useless, that mending is its own kind of beauty. On quiet nights, I sat by the window, knitting by lamplight. The needles clicked in steady rhythm, a heartbeat in the silence. Sometimes I whispered aloud, though no one was there to hear, "I am needed. I am enough." The house, once filled with shouting and dismissal, filled now with peace. Not loud peace, not fragile peace, but rooted peace, steady as the oak trees in the yard. There were moments of ache, of course, memories that caught me off guard. Passing her old bedroom door, I'd see flashes of her as a child, sprawled on the floor with crayons, hair in messy braids, eyes bright with trust. That child still lived inside my memory, untouched by betrayal. And sometimes grief would press heavy on my chest, reminding me that love does not vanish easily, even when it is wounded. But grief did not drown me, because I had something stronger now, dignity. One afternoon, as I worked in the garden, a neighbor's child stopped by, watching me kneel in the dirt. She tilted her head curiously and asked, "Why do you garden so much?" I smiled, brushing soil from my hands. "Because when you plant something with care," I told her, "it grows. And when you neglect it, it withers. That's true for flowers. And it's true for people too." She nodded solemnly, as children do when they hear something they don't yet understand, but will one day remember. The seasons turned. Spring to summer, summer to autumn. The house stood steady through it all, warm in winter, cool in summer, carrying me the way I had once carried her. Sometimes I thought about her, wherever she was. Did she regret her words? Did she miss the warmth she had squandered? I didn't know. And for the first time, I didn't need to. Because peace doesn't come from apologies. It comes from knowing you chose yourself when no one else would. One evening, as the sun set over the frozen lake, I stood on the porch with the keys in my hand. The same keys that had once dug into my palm the night she told me I wasn't needed. I turned them slowly, letting the metal catch the fading light. They no longer felt heavy. They felt right. I whispered into the cold air, "This house is mine. My life is mine. My worth is mine." And the silence answered back with stillness, as if the world itself agreed. I was no longer living in the shadow of betrayal. I was living in the light of reclamation. The lesson was simple, but it burned clear in my heart. Respect is not begged for. It is taken back piece by piece when someone tries to strip it away. And I had taken it back. I thought revenge would leave me bitter. Instead, it left me free. But before I close this chapter, I want you to hear the truth every parent and every child must remember. Real family is not the people who share your blood. Real family is the people who respect your worth. I gave everything to my daughter, my years, my health, my home. And when she told me I wasn't needed, I thought the world was ending. But the truth was simple. I was never unneeded. I was unappreciated. And there's a difference. If you've ever sacrificed for someone who forgot your value, hear me now. Your dignity is not theirs to give or take. It is yours always. The keys in my hand were not just for a house. They were for my freedom. And when I turned them, I opened a door that could never be closed again. Now I ask you, what would you do if your own child looked at you and said you weren't needed? Would you walk away? Or would you take back what was yours? Share your truth in the comments. Subscribe if this story touched your heart. And remember, silence can be broken, but dignity must be claimed.